Hello, I'm Susan Bean, and today's video is continuation of what we did yesterday with looking at layers and how to use layers. And tonight we're going to look at a different kind of layer. So I kept the same document open. We had these layers already, and I want to go over to the layers panel and take a look at some of the icons. I'm going to zoom in and there they are. Take a look at some of these icons at the very bottom. Here are layers. It's the layers panel. You can see we've been good in type names, so there's different leaves and there's a pear and a guy and a tower and a background layer. And here are the icons at the bottom of the layer. And the one that we're concerned with today is the little circle that's half black, half white. It looks almost like a little yin-yang thing without the cute curve. So that icon, this icon, is a list of all these amazing different things you can do to your picture that are non-destructive. They don't change your actual original pixels, but they do affect them. So here's the list. There are a lot of them. Some of them you'll probably never use, and some you'll probably use every time you use Photoshop. Here we go. There's the list. Now I'm going to zoom out so we can get to work. All right, so adjustment layers are a different kind of layer. The ones we made are made out of pixels, little colored squares called pixels. Adjustment layers are not made out of pixels. It's almost like, well, I have this acetate sheet here. If I hold this in front of me, it makes me look different and everything behind it look different. But the things don't change, the look changes. And that's kind of what adjustment layers are like. They change everything below them in the stacking order. And they're on their own little layers. So the first one I want to show you, because it's so easy to see what it's doing, is I'll go to this list and I'll press down and I'll go to black and white. This is the absolute best place to make things black and white in Photoshop. I said okay, or I clicked, and now there's this layer that's a black and white adjustment layer, and everything below it is black and white, and everything above it is not affected by it. So I'm going to drag it to the top here. So now everything's black and white. When you make an adjustment layer, the layer appears and it's already labeled. You don't have to, it already says it's a black and white adjustment layer. And the properties and the controls for that layer are in this panel below called properties. So if I click on another layer, you won't see that. You'll see the properties for this middle leaf layer. But if I click back on the black and white adjustment layer, here are the properties for that layer. And you can adjust all the reds. So for example, if I do this, I can make anything that has red in it darker or lighter. The guy layer isn't changing because he was already black and white. So it's not changing the way he looks. If he still had his skin tones, the reds and the yellows would do a lot to any skin tone. So let's see, we've got greens. sometimes you do these sliders and nothing happens because there aren't that many greens in the picture. Cyans are gonna do a lot here because that wall was cyan, but you can see that I can control individual colors. Here's the blues and the magentas. Um, there's, if I make a big mess, which I've just done, and I don't like it, at the bottom of the properties, way at the bottom, time to zoom in again. Way at the bottom, you can see that there's a trash can. I can throw away this adjustment layer. There's an eyeball, but we already have an eyeball to toggle its visibility. There's a little oops, undo and return the settings to the default. So I'm going to click that. And that brought them all back to their default settings. We're also going to look at this little icon. It's a little square with some sort of arrow in it. We'll look at that also very soon. So I'm gonna zoom back out and watch what happens. We have a black and white layer now. There's also a little hand icon. And here we go. You see the hand? If I click on that hand, it becomes very useful. So I'm going to click on it and I'm going to come over to the picture and it turns into an eyedropper and I can hold down. I'm holding it down now and pressing, and it automatically figures out what colors I want to change the tones of. So I can come over here to the wall. Sometimes you're not sure what colors you want. I find that almost everything I want to change is yellow. And sometimes I'll click on a green leaf and I could swear it's just green. But when I change the greens, not much happens. And when I change the yellows, lots happen. I can come over here and I can, oh, that's interesting. There are a bunch of presets. I can play around with those. I can try those. For those of you that were photographers in the black and white film days, you know that sometimes you bought filters for your camera, and it would, for example, if you took pictures of clouds against a blue sky, you could use a red or orange filter, and the filters would darken the opposite colors. So when you used a red filter, the blue sky would look really dark and the clouds would really stand out. You can simulate that here. So here's red filter. You get the idea. And go back to the default. I'm looking for something and it's not here, so I'll just leave it alone right now. All right, here we go. We've got black and white. It's at the top of the stacking order, except it's not on top of the varnish layer. I'm gonna, as I bring it down, keep in mind, and this is why I start with the black and white because it's so easy to see. Any adjustment layer that you use, that whole list that we looked at and that we'll look at more, any adjustment layer works only on layers below it. It does not affect layers above it. And that's why this leaf is not black and white, because it's above the adjustment layer. It's not being affected. If I move this down, you can see that that layer is also above the adjustment layer. And so they're not black and white. Same with the pear now. And the guy was already black and white, but same with the tower. I can't move it below the background layer because the background layer is locked. It doesn't allow things below it. And I wouldn't want to because I want this black and white effect. All right, I'm moving it back up. And here's the puzzle. What if I wanted just one leaf to be black and white, but not the others? Well, I could kind of put all three of them here, but what if I wanted the one on the left? So adjustment layers can be made to just apply to one individual layer below it. So I'm going to bring this up, and it's making all of everything black and white. But what if I just want the left leaf to be black and white? I can go down to that little square we were looking at a minute ago. And I'll zoom in. Here it is, right here. That is called clipping. Now I'm going to zoom out. And if I click that, watch what happens. And in fact, watch the layer here because it's going to move and change. I'm going to click the little clipping box, and the adjustment layer moves slightly to the side and has a little arrow pointing to the layer it's affecting. And the layer that it's affecting has an underline under the name now. That's a kind of elaborate way of saying this adjustment layer is clipping to just one layer below it. And you can see it's making just that layer black and white. If I want to unclip that, I just do the same thing in reverse. I click that little box way at the bottom of the properties. And now the adjustment layer is affecting everything below it. I can also turn the eyeball on and off to see if I like this or if I want to change it. But one of the reasons that I say this is the best place to make your image black and white is that, first of all, if you make it black and white, and even if you're really happy with it and think it's just great, here we go. Something could happen and you could change your mind. Like your client could call up and say, you know, that black and white one you had, do you have that in color? And I can't tell you how many times this has happened. So if you do it the right way, in a non-destructive way, with a layer, you can say to your client or yourself, no problem. It doesn't have to be black and white at all. And you can come up here and you open the file and you just turn the eyeball off on that layer, and now it's a color picture. The other reason that I think this is such a good place to make things black and white, if that's what you're trying to do, is that adjustment layers have opacity. So this is 100% black and white, but what if I change the opacity? And remember, you can do it up here in this upper right corner, but all you have to do is go to the move tool, move, type V, and just type a number. So what if I want this 50% black and white? I just type 5. Or this is 100. I type 0 as 100. This is 50. This is 30. So I can get a nice faded color look if I want, kind of a washed out look. It doesn't have to be completely black and white or completely color. I can try out different looks. All right, so that is one adjustment layer. It's the black and white adjustment layer. And I'm going to turn that off for now, just turn its eyeball off. If I want to get rid of it, I'll just drag it to the little trash icon at the bottom of the layers panel. If I want it to just apply to one layer, I drag it above that layer. I'm doing the pear now. And I click on the little clipping icon, the little square at the bottom of the properties. And now just the pear is black and white. So that's your introduction to adjustment layers. Let's look at another one. Go here to the little yin yang circle. And there are little groups. You can see there's lines between these little groups of adjustment layers. One of the things that you often need to do is adjust the contrast. In your picture, you work on it and you do some things to it, and it looks a little blah, a little dull, a little, in the old black and white days, we used to call it muddy. It needs a little oomph. So there are several ways to do that with adjustment layers. One is brightness and contrast, one is levels, one is curves, and one is exposure, these 4 adjustment layers. It's kind of like the 3 bears. Brightness and contrast is too, um, uh, it's not subtle. Levels is great. Curves is very expert. So we have the baby bear, the mama bear, and the papa bear. If you're already using curves, well, then you can do it with an adjustment layer. Brightness and contrast, I don't suggest because it's just 2 sliders. It's brighter or more contrast or less contrast. It's not subtle at all, and it adjusts everything the same amount. Don't use it. It's simply not done. All right, so I'm going to throw that away now that I said my snobby little thing there. Don't use brightness and contrast. But back to the adjustment layers, and let's try levels. This is the one that I prefer most of the time. I use curves sometimes when I really need it, which is almost never. Here we go. Here are the controls for the levels adjustment layer. And I'm going to pull it up to the top so it affects everything. When you make a new layer, whether it's an adjustment layer or a blank new layer or a copy, whatever layer you have active, it will put the new layer right above that. So what I really should have done before I made the levels layer was highlighted this layer, and then it would have automatically put the new adjustment layer right above that. Okay, so I don't see the controls for it because I'm clicked on the leaf layer right now. Now I'll click on the levels layer, and we'll come down here to the properties, and there are 3 points. Well, there's a graph of all the tones in this picture. And on the left-hand side of the graph is the black point. The blackest pixels are at that edge. On the other edge, on the right, that's the white point. And in the middle, those are the midtones. And you can see this doesn't have any white in it, this picture. It has maybe a little black, but not much. Pictures really need some black or they look dull and they don't have any dimension. So I'm going to move this. There's a little playhead here, and I'm going to hold it down and move it in. I'm going to exaggerate it so you can see more and more pixels. Any pixels in this graph to the left of this playhead turn black. So you can see that happening. That's probably not what we want, but we wanted some. So we just move it a little till some pixels are to the left of that point. Now we have some black in the picture. So I do the black point first. Then I come over here, and if I need to, if I don't see any pixels in the graph at the far right, I move this in, and anything to the right of this point turns white. And I'll exaggerate it so you can see now we're starting to get nuclear white. Don't want that, but we just want a little white. And then lastly, I adjust the midtones. And you don't have to memorize which direction, you just do it and look at it. So right about there. Now I want to see my work. I want to see what it's done. Sometimes I haven't done much, but I'm going to turn the eyeball of that layer on and off. Subtle, not a wild difference. And maybe you don't want a wild difference. If I want more contrast, I get blacker blacks and whiter whites. So I'll move this in, I'll move that in, and I'll change the midtones. Oops, it's not nothing's happening because I turned the eyeball off. So there's troubleshooting. What layer am I on? Oh, I'm not. Okay, so I moved the blacks in, I moved the whites in, and now I'm fiddling around with the midtones. And now you'll see more of a difference, more contrast. One thing that you should know about the levels adjustment layer is that sometimes you tend to get a color shift if you're changing the contrast, and you don't want a color shift. So to prevent that, when you do a levels adjustment layer, you go up here where it says normal, and remember, wherever you see that normal, that's a list of blending modes. And there's one blending mode that you use, and it's of course it's at the bottom of the list, way down here, luminosity. And when you set levels to the blending mode of luminosity, what you're really telling it is change the contrast, but do not change the color cast. So eventually I'll show you how to automate some things. And that's one of the things I automated. I have a little button I can press in my setup. And when I press that button, it makes the levels adjustment layer and sets the blending mode to luminosity. So I don't have to do that step each time. I'll show you how to set that up when we get to automating things. All right, so we have a levels adjustment layer, we have a black and white adjustment layer, and let's do one more. Hue and saturation is one that I use really quite often. Here it is. Again, I want it to affect everything, so I have it way at the top. And this is what I was looking for before. I can either change I'm going to just change the yellows. Let's see what that does. So I picked from this list of which tones. I picked yellows. And now I have hue, saturation, and lightness. Mostly I'm here to just change the saturation so I can really make the yellows in this picture pop out, or I can dull them down. And I'm liking the tank duller, but I'm liking the leaves brighter. So we'll fix that in a minute. I can also change the hue. I have the yellows, so I can make the yellows greener or redder. Usually you do not mess with lightness and darkness here. It's not pretty. There's another thing that you can do, and that is, here's that little hand icon we saw previously when we were looking at a different adjustment layer. And I'm going to click that, come over here, and now I can just click, and it's telling me way over back in the properties, it's telling me, oh, you want to change the cyans, and I can press down and move side to side to make the cyan more intense or more dull. And I can try this one. This is the reds it's telling me. So I can change the reds. When you do it, it's going to change all the yellows or all the reds or all the cyans. Another one of the good things about doing things with adjustment layers is, if you notice, each one of them comes with a little white square just to the right of it. The regular pixel layers don't come that way, but the adjustment layers come that way. And let's take a look at that. Here it is. That's called a mask. And when we were going through the tools and we got to the eraser tools, I poo-pooed them and said, oh no, we don't use the eraser tools because they're destructive. We have a better way of doing that. And today we've arrived at the better way. It's called a mask, and it looks like the white square that you're looking at. And you can see that it has a kind of partial frame, like a little white frame around it. The one below it does not. That frame means the mask is active, and if you take a paintbrush and paint, you'll be painting on the mask. And why would you want to do that? I'll show you. It's the gateway to all control in Photoshop. That's why. So I'm going to zoom out of this, and I have the hue saturation on. Let's look at what it's doing. I'm going to exaggerate it. I'm on the yellows. I'm going to really exaggerate the yellows. So maybe I like the leaves really bright yellow, but I don't like the tank bright yellow. I make sure that I've clicked on the mask for hue and saturation that's doing those, making those yellows intense. I'm going to go to the brush. The shortcut for brush is B for brush. I'm going to check up here to make sure that the opacity is what I want. And I'm going to start painting. And I'm going to paint with black. Black is the color that erases things. Look over at the swatches, got black. And I'm going to start painting where I don't want the hue and saturation to affect. And you can see that this tank is getting duller because I'm painting out that bright yellow that the hue and saturation layer was doing. Now I'm going to try one of the leaves. I'm going to make the brush smaller, and there's a great keyboard shortcut for that. I'll show you pretty soon. But now I'm just going to do half this leaf. I'm taking away the hue and saturation layer in that place. If I change my mind, I switch to white, and I can put it back. So this is a kind of erasing that is non-destructive, and you can't go wrong with it, because if you mess up or you change your mind, you just switch from black to white or white to black. You can keep going back and forth as many times as it takes to get it perfect for what you want. So you can see the mask. I'm going to get the mask out. This is the mask. I just made it very big so you can see it. You can see this is where I painted, and this is where the hue and saturation, wherever I painted black, this is where the hue and saturation does not show. And everywhere it's white, the hue and saturation adjustment does show. So I did that. If you want to see the mask, I did that by holding the Option or Alt key and clicking on it, and that made it pop out, and then I click to put it away. All right, so adjustment layers, you can have many, many, many of them. You can copy them to double the effect. And let's look at a couple more. I'm going to select the background layer. And now I'm going to go back to the little yin yang thing. And one of my favorite ones to do is solid color adjustment layer. Let's try that. Because it's above the background layer, it's hiding the background layer. It's a solid color after all. And it immediately gives me the color picker. And I can pick a color. And say okay. And let's see, I'm going to turn the hue and saturation layer off because it's affecting the color of the solid color. I don't want it to do that. And remember, I can do opacity. So I'm going to go to the Move tool, V, and type 5. And now you can see can change the solid color. A lot of people for years said, how do you change the background? How do you cut things out, which we'll learn how to do. And if you want a solid color, you do an adjustment layer. You don't have to paint. You do it on an adjustment layer. And then usually once I make an adjustment, a solid color adjustment layer, I don't like the color. I thought I liked it and I changed my mind. So the great thing about it is if you have this layer and you don't like the color, you simply double click on the color itself in the layer and you get the color picker back and you can alter it anytime you want. Even, I find that I do things and a couple days later I want to go back and change the color. So it's great. It's non-committal. You're not locked in. Okay, let's see. And adjustment layers have blending mode. So I have this color that I put here. What if I go up to normal and try different blending modes? I can get all kinds of different things going on here. Ooh, that was fun. All right, so here's normal, back to normal. And now I'm going to get rid of this. I don't want it anymore, but that's solid color. It says color fill now, but it said solid color. And here's a fun one. Pattern. You can make a layer that's just a pattern. This one, the stripes, I can change the scale, make the pattern bigger. I can change the angle. And there are all kinds of patterns. There are patterns that come with Photoshop, trees, grass, water, but I like to make my own. And I've made some using this picture, and I'll show you what they look like. Let's make that smaller. That'll look better smaller. Not that small. There. And leaves. And I made a checkerboard pattern. So I'm going to show you how to make a pattern because it's fun. And then we'll stop for tonight. So I'm going to cancel out of this. Here's how you make a pattern. You decide on something that you want to make a pattern out of. I'll do the pear again. I like doing the pear. Oops. auto select, and click. All right, go to the marquee tool. Do you remember the shortcut for the marquee tool? It's M. There it is. And there's two of them. There's a round and a rectangle. You must, for patterns, you have to use the rectangle. You click and start dragging it. And if it's not positioned correctly, you hold the space before you let go. I'd like right now, I don't like where it is. I want to move it over. Before you let go, you hold the space bar down. And when the space bar is held down, you can reposition the marquee tool. And now I'll continue pulling and let go. All right, we've got that. That's called a selection, by the way. We've got that pair selected and the blue behind it. And I'm going to go to, here's how you make a pattern. It's very difficult. Not edit, define pattern, and you name it. Say okay. And then one more step, because once you have something selected, now I want to see that pattern. Once you have something selected, it will only allow you to work in that area. So we don't want to have the pattern only in that area. So there's a selection menu up here, deselect, or Command D for, or Control D for deselect. But by the way, when it was surrounded like this, the technical term for those little things that define the area that's selected, they are actually called marching ants. That's the technical term for them. So I'm going to do Command D. Now, if I want to, I can come over here and make a pattern layer. And I can pick the pattern I just made. Oh, it's lovely. And I can scale it down, a little smaller. Here it is. And because it came with a layer mask, the little white square to the right of it, I can click on the white square, make sure the frame is around it. That means I'm actually working on the mask. Go to the brush, B, make sure that I'm using black. If you're trying this at home and it doesn't work, check that you're using black if you want to erase. If you use white, it puts back, so you won't see anything happening. Okay, and I'm just going to erase some of this. I'm erasing the pattern. If I want to put it back, I switch. And I think I told you the other day, but I'll say it again. If you want to switch from erasing to putting back, you want to switch from black to white, you just type the letter X on your keyboard and it switches the colors. Well, this isn't very pretty, but I think you get the idea. There. All right. One more thing before we go. I'm going to turn that layer off. And I'm going to go back to the brush. When you're using a tool that has a brush size like this, there is a keyboard shortcut that helps you make the brush bigger or smaller. The lousy way is to go up here, way up to the upper left, click and hold down, and there's a brush size slider, but you can't see in your picture how big the brush will be till you go back down here. So that's a really lousy way to do it. And the better way to do it is to look at your keyboard and locate the letter P, as in petite. Right to the right of the letter P on your keyboard are two bracket keys. Those keys make the brush smaller. The one that's next to petite makes it smaller. And then the one next to the bracket next to that makes it bigger. You can hold it down and it'll just grow, or you can tap it. And my brush is very hard edged and I don't like that. So another thing you can do is what you just did to make the brush smaller. You use that same key, but you add the shift key and it makes the brush softer. And the other key that makes the brush bigger with the shift key makes the brush harder. So there's a big soft brush. Make it a little smaller. All right, well, I'll say that many, many times to remind you as we go through and do things so that if you miss it, you can get it, but also repetition helps. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. Make yourself some adjustment layers and play with them. When I teach teenagers, they just play with everything and they learn really fast. So don't be afraid. The adjustment layers won't hurt anything. Try other things on this list and see what they do. Play around, experiment, have fun with them. And if you don't like them, simply throw them away. When you save your picture and you want some of them to be saved with what you're doing, save it as a Photoshop document or a TIFF, and all the layers will be that you made will be retained. All right, I hope I'll see you again. Tomorrow we'll do some things with type layers. All right, good night.